In this presentation, I am going to discuss the functions of the digestive system. More specifically, I will be discussing how it works together to break down food that a person consumes orally and how it would then be excreted out of the body. The first element of the digestive tract I will talk about is the mouth. The mouth contains a hard palate and a soft palate. The soft palate is located on the back roof of the mouth. On the soft palate, there is something called a uvula. This structure is important to note before we go in depth about how food is swallowed, because its main function is that when you are swallowing a substance, be it water or food or medicine, it moves up to close off the nasal passage to prevent the substance from going into the lungs. This allows a one-way path down the throat into the esophagus. The next part of the mouth I will focus on is the tongue. The tongue has a very important role. When we consume food, for example, underneath our tongue it produces saliva from our salivary glands. As we chew our food, the saliva that is produced will mix together, creating a substance called a bolus. The bolus is what we try to swallow, as it contains remains of our food that is broken down. Your tongue also contains some important structures. One is known as the papilla. There are two types of papilla, fungiform and filiform. Both have important functions and are dispersed around the tongue. The fungiform papillae contains taste buds, while the filiform papillae helps to create an abrasive surface. This feature allows for the tongue to have a rough surface. However, this one does not contain taste buds. Going back to the salivary glands in the mouth, there are three different types. Depending on the location of the gland, it secretes saliva through ducts in order to create a bolus while one is chewing. These salivary glands are constantly producing saliva. The three glands are called the parotid salivary gland, the sublingual salivary gland, and the submandibular salivary gland. And each one comes with their own duct. Next, we will move into the pharynx, also known as the throat. The pharynx is a passageway for food, liquid, and air. There are three main segments: the nasopharynx, which is a special case as it is only a passageway for air, and the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx are both a passageway for air, food, and liquid. Next is the epiglottitis. This is important to note for later because the epiglottitis has a role in both the pharynx and the esophagus. Then there is the esophagus, which is a muscular tube that connects the pharynx to the stomach. The esophagus contains something called sphincters. The primary purpose is to make sure that whatever is consumed does not travel backwards. This is important to note because the bolus, which I will be discussing later, gets turned into something called chyme, which becomes very acidic and can be very bad to travel back up to the throat. There are two types of sphincters. The superior one is called the esophageal sphincter, and the inferior one is called the lower esophageal sphincter. They both contribute to controlling the food, but the upper sphincter is not very tough. However, it helps to control movement of the bolus from the pharynx to the esophagus. The lower sphincter is tougher, and its role is to allow the food to pass through from the esophagus into the next organ, which is the stomach. Now we have reached the stomach. The stomach's function has a lot to do with mixing. This is because in order for the small intestine to only receive things that are broken down and into liquid form, so the stomach has to turn the bolus into a liquidy substance, which is called chyme, which I have mentioned previously. Looking at the stomach components, the esophagus connects to the stomach and the cardia. The cardia is located superiorly on the stomach and it is a wide structure. The cardia then leads down to the lumen area. As the bolus makes its way down to the lumen, the stomach starts to secrete mucus, hydrochloric acids, and pepsin in order to break things down to the ideal substance chyme, so it can enter the small intestines. After chyme is produced, It stays in the pyloric canal until it leaves the stomach and enters the first segment of the small intestine known as the duodenum. Before I talk about the duodenum, I want to just briefly introduce the three segments of the small intestines. The first segment, as mentioned, is the duodenum, second is the jejunum, and third is the ileum. The duodenum is the main pancreatic duct. This is what again connects the stomach to the small intestines, where the chyme enters and travels through. It is responsible for the continuous breakdown process. Next is the jejunum and the ileum. They both primarily focus on the absorption of nutrients into the bloodstream. The ileum is also the largest segment of the small intestine. This is a micrograph of the small intestine. In the first photograph, it has something called villi, which is the purple thing sticking out in the photograph. It is also visible in the second photograph to the right, but the longer structures are called villus. The purpose of the villi and the villus is to help increase the surface area of the small intestine. After reaching the ileum, the end of the small intestines, the large intestine starts. The large intestines is divided into four main regions: the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus. The ileum from the small intestines meets the first segment of the large intestine, which is the cecum. The cecum is smaller compared to the rest of the large intestine. Its main function is to absorb fluids. The cecum then connects to the colon. The colon has many components. It has an ascending colon, descending colon, right and left colic flexure, transverse colon, and a sigmoid colon. The colon's main function overall is to also reabsorb water back into the body. In addition, it helps to compact what substance is left into the form of feces. The sigmoid colon connects the colon to the rectum. The rectum is where all the feces get stored before being released out of the anal canal. This helps to prevent the feces from constantly being secreted. The anal canal is connected to the rectum. Its main function is to eliminate and excrete the feces out of the body. That is the end of my presentation of the digestive system. Thank you for listening.